Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I am going to talk about all the new authors that I discovered and read this year. I'm going to be tier ranking them, picking which ones are the worst and which ones are the best. I read a total of 46 new to me authors, which I would say is a pretty good number. I read a little bit over 200 books this year so far, so a fifth of them were new to me authors. A few of these are debut authors from this year as well, so let's get into it. Let's get into tier ranking all of the new to me romance authors that I read in 2023. Okay, so here is my tier list. At the top, the best ones: S tier, obsessed, will read everything from them. And then A tier, why have I not read them sooner? B tier, a solid author, would read again. C tier, not bad, might try again. D tier, wasn't all that impressed. And then at the bottom, F tier, never touching again. And then here are all the different authors that I read this year. For a couple of these authors, I read multiple books from them, but I'm only going to show the cover of the first book that I read from them. Okay, let's start off with this first one. This is Jacqueline Snow. She wrote Snowed In for Christmas, which I recently just read and talked about in a video, my holiday romance reads video, because this is a holiday romance. It's a Christmas romance and it was so adorable. I like the writing, I love the heroine, I love the whole grumpy sunshine dynamic. It was great. I highly recommend it as a holiday winter romance if you're in the mood for that right now. So I will put her in B tier because she's definitely a solid author and I would want to read her again. Hopefully she writes more Christmas romances because that one was great. And then we have Lyla Sage. She blew up pretty big this year. This is her book Done and Dusted, and this one was her debut. It was her first ever book. It's this small town cowboy romance. It's perfect timing because this year's all about the small towns and all about the cowboys. For me though, I didn't really love this one. I didn't find it all that interesting or unique compared to, you know, all the other many small town cowboy romances. So this one was just okay. I'm gonna put it in C tier. Not bad. I mean, I thought her writing was fine, so I wouldn't mind trying her again. It's just not a high priority for me, and I'm not like insanely excited about the next book in that series. And then this one is Emily Rath. The first book that I read from her was her big one, Pucking Around, and I absolutely adored it. It's this why choose reverse harem hockey romance and I love these characters. They were so wonderful. The writing was fun and fresh. I did not read the prequel novella, but I still was instantly hooked as soon as I started reading Pucking Around, and even though it was 700 pages long, it didn't really feel that long. So props to Emily Rath for that. I'm definitely putting her in A tier for sure. I love that book. I love her now. I do know she has a bunch of historical romances that she wrote before this, so I'm curious to see how well those compare to Pucking Around. But yeah, she definitely made it big with this hockey romance. Now we have Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This is a debut book. It's a fantasy romance and it had such a great premise, but I didn't really vibe with the story or the writing. It was kind of a struggle to get into it and it just wasn't the fun fantasy rom-com that I was hoping for. Also, this book ended on a cliffhanger that I could not care less about. So unfortunately I have to put this in D tier because I was not all that impressed. Alright, now we have Tara DeWitt and her book Funny Feelings. This one was adorable. I loved reading about a female comedian. The hero was a fantastic single dad. I loved their friendship, their business relationship that turns into something more after they get into a fake dating situation. So this one was a lot of fun. It felt very unique to me. I will put it in B tier. And then for my book club for Ravished by Romance, we read Kimberly Lemming. This one is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. It's a fantasy romance, a fantasy rom-com about a heroine who saves the life of a demon, and she ends up going on an adventure with him to save the lives of other demons. I thought this one was alright. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. It was mostly because the writing, it felt almost anachronistic. It's not the exact right word, because it's a fantasy romance, but there's a lot of modern day slang in this fantasy romance that just felt it felt like it didn't belong and it would constantly take me out of the story. It's also a very quick read, so I feel like the world development probably could have been a bit stronger here. So I'm putting it in C tier. It's not bad, but I would be curious enough to try the author again. And then we're getting into some monster romances that I read for Halloween. I did a whole monster romance, like smutty, wild monster romance video. And these next two are two of the novellas that I read. So this first one is by Siggy Shade. It is literally a Loch Ness monster romance. It's called The Loch Ness Monster. I have to admit, I really didn't know what I was expecting to read when I went into that one. I can't say that I loved it or enjoyed it that much. I mostly read it for the novelty, and it did kind of blow me away with what went on in this monster romance. I am gonna put it in D tier though, just because I am a little scared to ever try reading this author again, but I'm not gonna say I'm never gonna read her again. And then this other monster romance is by Vera Valentine. This is the author who wrote the freaking door romance. Like, the hero is a literal door and the heroine does things with him as a door. So I don't know where I can honestly put this. I'm kind of torn between D and C tier. I was a little impressed by the writing. It was a lot more flowery than I expected in a door romance, so I might just throw it into C tier. Next I have Hannah Bonham Young. I read her for the first time this year. I read Next of Kin. This is her debut book, but it was not her debut this year. It came out last year, but I did finally read it this year. It did get picked up by a publisher. It's getting republished next year, and I gotta admit, I did not love this book as much as everyone else did, so I'm almost tempted to put this in D tier. But it's not like the writing was bad or anything. I just really disliked this hero. I like the premise of the story though, but I can't say that it was executed well enough for me. But that being said, I do really want to read her new book, Out on a Limb, so I'll just put it in C tier because I do want to give her another try. I have another monster romance. This one is by Violet Taylor. This is called Ours for Halloween. I had a fantastic time with this one. Out of all the wild, smutty monster romances that I read for Halloween, this one was by far my favorite. It was hot, it was wild, it was super interesting. It had a pretty unique plot twist to it, so I am putting this one in B tier. I read Liz Maverick for the first time this year. This book is Still Hung Up on You, and it's on the Audible Plus catalog. It's one of those Audible originals, and it's a novella. It's a super quick read. It's this very adorable second chance romance, so I had a great time with it. I will say most of what was enjoyable about this one was the actual audiobook, like the narrators, the little details that I added in, like the background stuff. But overall, as a whole, I did really like this Liz Maverick book, so I'm putting her in B tier. And then this next one I literally just finished up yesterday. It's Trick Shot by Kayla Gross, or Gross. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but this author kind of became big this holiday season. Everyone's been reading this novella of hers, this spicy novella of hers. It's an MMF Christmas romance, and it was cute. It definitely delivered on the spice. I am gonna put out a vlog with me talking more about this book, but I definitely wanted to love it a bit more too. So I am gonna put her in C tier. Definitely not bad, but not the B or higher that I kind of expected after, you know, all the hype for it, but I would want to try her again. And then this next one is Avery Keelan. This is Offside. I read two of her books this year, Offside and The Enforcer. Offside was the first one that I read. I think it was for my book club. It's this viral book that started off on Wattpad, and it just got this cute new illustrated cover. So this one I am kind of sad to say I was not all that impressed by. It felt like your very typical new adult college romance, I was not really blown away by it. I guess I had too high expectations for it just because so many people have read this one and talked about it. So this first book that I tried from Avery Keelan, it was just okay. I wanted to give her another chance, so I read The Enforcer after that. And it was also very meh. Honestly, I'm kind of torn between C and D tier though. Like, it could go either way, but I think since I gave the author another try and I still was not that impressed, I'll just leave it at D tier. This next author is T.L. Smith. I read Cavalier by her, and this one was kind of a mess. I did not enjoy this book at all. The plot was all over the place. It was basically just all smut, but it wasn't even hot. The romance I also wasn't feeling like at all, so I am gonna have to put this in F tier. I have absolutely no plans to read this author again or continue with that series. The next author is Sienna Snow. This one kind of has a similar vibe to T.L. Smith Cavalier, but it's a little bit better. I remember this theme being a little bit better, but it's also another sort of erotic romance. There's some sort of kink going on that I really don't remember too much. I'm just gonna have to stick this one in D tier. And then we're getting into one of my absolute favorite authors and books that I read this year. This is S.T. Abby and her Mindfuck series, and this series blew me away. I absolutely have to put S.T. Abby in S tier. I was obsessed, and I'm so sad to say that even though I want to read everything from them, they passed away a couple years ago. Technically, I have read this author before, but under her different pen names. I've read her as Christy Cunning, but I've never read her as S.T. Abby, so I'm counting it for this video. I mean, any excuse I have to talk about the Mindfuck series, I will take it. So yeah, this series was incredible, so unforgettable. It's this epic dark romance between a serial killer heroine and an FBI agent hero. It was everything. And then I have May Sage, who's also known as Alexi Blake. I read her for the first time. I read The Cursed Crown because this book was featured in a special edition box in the Arcane Society. That edition is so beautiful, so I thought I would give it a try, and I really liked it. I like the author's writing. The book is a bit short though, so don't expect this fantasy romance to have that much going on, but for what it was, for like a fantasy romance novella, I enjoyed myself. So this author was very solid. I would read again. Next up is Andy Arndt and Tara Civic. I'm only really counting Andy Arndt here because I have read Tara Civic before, but Andy Arndt is a new to me author, although I have listened to her audiobooks before. She is a very well-known audiobook narrator, romance narrator. She does a ton of great female voices, but this was her first time writing a book, I believe. It's this very silly, over-the-top rom-com about a heroine who starts her own podcast about romance books. And unfortunately, the humor wasn't really my style here. I didn't vibe with it all that much. I wanted to love it more, but I'm gonna have to stick this in D tier. I wasn't all that impressed. And if you thought the monster romances were over, nope. I read Sam King next. This is Slammed by the Minotaur, and it's like a double meaning type of title, because yes, there is Minotaur smut, but the Minotaur is also a prison guard and the heroine is in the slammer. Honestly, it's a super fun smutty novella. I do want to try this author again, so B tier. And then this next one is fan fiction that absolutely blew my mind. This is Senlin Yu, who wrote Manacled, and this was really my first time diving into the whole fan fiction world, diving into the Harry Potter fan fiction world, learning everything about Hermione, and honestly, what a way to go, right? This book is now my Harry Potter canon. I refuse to believe the ending of the actual Harry Potter series anymore. Hermione is everything now. I loved Draco in this book. I am so obsessed with him. Like, if you read this book, every preconceived notion that you might have about fan fiction, the writing, the storytelling, it'll blow those preconceived notions away. So I 100% have to put this in S tier. I am so obsessed with this book. And I do want to read more of this author's fanfic stuff. The writing alone was already incredible. This next author is Lana Pacherzik. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. She's a fantasy romance author, and I finally read her for the first time. This is The Longing of Lone Wolves. It's the first book in her very long fantasy romance series, but I liked it. I also read this one for my book club. We like trying new authors there, but this one was interesting. I can't say that I loved it, but I've heard that the series does get better from here. So it wasn't a bad book, and I am curious enough to read more of her, so C tier. And then this author is Olivia Hale. I really had never heard of her before until I saw this book on the Audible Plus catalog. The book that I read was Think Outside the Boss, and it was a kind of weird book. It was weird in the sense that I felt like the hero wasn't all that into the heroine, like, at all. I did not buy the romance here, so for my first time reading this author, I was not impressed, so D tier. Next up is Liv Zander. I read a dark fantasy romance from her. It's called King of Flesh and Bone, and this book was kind of wild. It's like 90% dark, 10% romance, so it was a bit too, not too much, but just not enjoyable. There was a lot of assault, sexual assault, and it's not like I can't read that, especially like in dark romance. It's kind of sometimes a given, but it just was not a fun time. It was not enjoyable. I felt so bad for the heroine. It was just not for me, and I really don't have plans to read this author again after this, so F tier. And then this author is Evelyn Sola. She wrote the Take series, which I read, although technically I only read books 2 and 3. I skipped over book 1 because my library never got it, never got the audiobook. I'm still waiting on it, okay? But the other books that I did read, I liked. They're super angsty, very dramatic, and they do have obsessed heroes, so I was there for it. She definitely belongs in B tier for me. I read another new to me fantasy romance author. I guess I've been reading a lot of new fantasy romance authors this year. I didn't realize it until now, but this is Harper L. Woods. I have read her other pen name. She writes under Adelaide Forest. She writes dark romances under that pen name, but Harper L. Woods is her fantasy romance author name. Unfortunately, I prefer her dark romances over her fantasy romances. This one is What Lies Beyond the Veil. I read the first 3 books in this Flesh and Bone series, and each one of them I keep hoping I'll enjoy more, but they were so very average. I honestly don't know why I keep reading the books, but at least there's an obsessed hero. Like, this is a very dark, morally gray hero who only lives for his heroine, so I'm like, oh, fine, I do like that, so I guess I'll keep reading. But overall, I'm gonna put this in D tier. Next is another author that I read for my book club. This is J.L. Seegers. Restore Me was our book club read. It was her first book, I believe, but it came out last year. I did really enjoy the author's writing, but this book was just too long. It definitely needed a bit of editing, like cutting down on repetitive stuff, but for a debut book, it wasn't bad at all. Like, I really enjoyed the characters, the steam was great, super hot. I loved the angst and the drama. It just felt too long. So I am kind of torn between B and C tier. Like, there definitely could have been some improvements, but given that this is a debut book, I'll go easy on it and put it in B tier. I have heard that the rest of the series does get better, and those books are on my TBR, so I would read her again. The next author that I have is Rune Hunt. She's another monster romance author that I tried, and her book Insatiable was not really for me. There's a scene with like period blood that I just could not handle. The writing also wasn't the best here. It felt a little bit unpolished. So I'm gonna have to stick this in D tier. Next is Adrienne Lee. I read one of her fantasy paranormal romances. It's called From Salt to Sky, and I'm not gonna lie, this book was kind of bad. Like, I was so confused when I was reading it. I really did not know what was going on. And even when I finished this book, it was just not computing. Like, the author tried to make it this sweeping gothic romance, but it wasn't really that. So as much as I wanted to like this one more, I have to put this in D tier. Next up is C.E. Ritchie. I read Iced Out. This is an MM hockey romance. I've heard all the good things about it, so I had to give this author a try. And I'm so glad I did, because Iced Out was fantastic. It's this great MM enemies to lovers hockey romance. Both the main characters are part of the same hockey team, and they start hooking up as part of a superstition that helps them win their games. It's a lot of fun, super steamy, so I will have to put this author in B tier. And then I have Marie Maravilla. I read her for my book club. This is another debut from last year. The writing does feel like a debut. It's got that almost unpolished feel to it. It's not bad. I did see the potential of it, and I did like the story overall, but again, it's just the type of book where you could tell it was a debut book. I still had fun with it though. It's this dark mafia MC romance. The heroine is on the mafia side, the hero is on the MC side, and they have to work together for this partnership. I am a little torn between B and C tier, but I'll have to go with C tier. And then this cute little monster romance is by Ashley Bennett. I've seen this author around, I've seen her books around, and I've been wanting to give her a try, so I finally did. I read Muscles and Monsters, and this one is very much a monster rom-com. The hero is a werewolf, like he's furry and all, he's got fangs, and he's also a gym bro. It's short and sweet and hot. I will say I expected a little bit more from it, but it wasn't bad, and I do want to try this author again, so C tier. Next up, I have Katarina Mara. I read her for the first time this year, and I've binged so many of her books since discovering her. Her books are just so easily bingeable. They have all the fun tropes. Her audiobooks are really well done. I have a great time reading them and listening to them. So the first book that I read from her was Until You, which is the first book in her Off Limits series. It was actually the very first book that I read in 2023. It was fantastic. As soon as I read her, I was like, how have I not read her sooner? So I have to put her in A tier. So since discovering her, I've read maybe like 4 or 5 books now. She's just a great author. Another fantastic author is this next one, Liz Tomforde. I do have to admit, if I only read Mile High, which is the first book in her Windy City series, the first book that I read from her, if I only read this one, I would put her in B tier, because I like this book, but it wasn't amazing. Like, I had so many expectations after hearing all the hype for her. But then I read The Right Move, and I most recently finished up Caught Up, and those books were everything. They're some of my top favorite reads of 2023, so I have to bump her up to A tier, because that's what she deserves. The next new to me author is Julie Soto. She is a debut author for 2023. She came out with Forget Me Not, which is this really fun wedding romance. It's a second chance romance. The hero is a bit of a grump. It's also another book club read of mine, and I did like it. Like, the writing was great, especially for a debut. I am a sucker for second chance romance. It didn't play out quite as well as I'd hoped, but I did still fall very hard for this grumpy hero. So I am gonna put her in B tier. Next is a very interesting author. I have Hannah Grace here. I read her for the first time. I read Icebreaker, and I gotta say, based on Icebreaker alone, I would put this in D tier, but after having read the sequel, after reading Wildfire, she's definitely bumped up from D tier. Honestly, Wildfire was good enough to bump her up to B tier, because I had so much fun with that one. It was such a sweet, adorable college romance. It's set during summer. The main characters are new camp counselors. It had all the good summer camp vibes. The hero is this sweet, shy boy. It was great. So I do need to put her in B tier. because I definitely want to read more of this series. Another new to me author is Sarah Adams. She's kind of blown up recently. This is her newest book, Practice Makes Perfect. I read this for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Like, it blew up big enough to be nominated, and it was alright. I honestly didn't see why it blew up so big, but it's like this cute little small town romance. Nothing all that special about it, but I enjoyed the writing for the most part, so I will put her in C tier. Not bad, but I would try her again. She's just not high priority. I read another Sarah author. This is Sarah Blue. I've heard great things about her books, so I thought I would read one of her hockey romances, one of her Omegaverse romances. This is One Pucked Up Pack. It definitely was interesting reading about Omegaverse and hockey in the same book. I can't say that I loved it though. I definitely had some issues with the writing. The writing, it felt a little all over the place, not too cohesive. So I'm just gonna put her in C tier. Next up is Curtis Sittenfeld with romantic comedy. This freaking book. This is really my one and only DNF of this year. Like, at least for a book that I've read a good chunk of before I had to put it down, because I read like 120 something pages of it and had to stop there. It was just so bad. It's fiction, like literary fiction, but for some reason the publisher is calling it a romance. It got nominated in the romance category for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Why? I have no idea. Just because it's called romantic comedy, I guess. But the book itself sucked. I could not stand this heroine. She had so much self-hatred, so much hatred towards other people, guys mostly, and also this book takes place during 2018 and 2020. We have COVID going on, and I was just not here for it. So I am definitely putting this in F tier. Next up is Skylar Mason. She's the author of the Faithless duet, which I really had high hopes for, mostly because going into it I knew it was going to be a groveling romance. Unfortunately though, this duet, each book is like 50 pages long each, which is not enough time to deal with lots of angst and grovel, because the hero, like the main characters, are married and the hero cheated on his wife for over a decade, and 100 pages are not enough to grovel for that. I mean, if you can even believe in the grovel at all. So I did have higher hopes for this, but honestly I was less than impressed, so D tier. Alright, getting into the last of the monster romance authors that I read. This is Aiden Pierce. I read Burn for Jack, which is like a jack-o'-lantern monster romance. The hero literally has a pumpkin for a head. It was pretty wild, but nothing too impressive. The smut, I mean, it was fine. It was interesting with some vines going on. Like, the hero literally had vines going out of his back, but I don't know. I'm kind of torn between C and D tier for this one. I liked it, but I don't know if I would read the author again. I'll just put this in D tier. And then I have Reese Rivers here. I read her Masked Duet. I'm not gonna lie, I mostly read this duet because I heard there was good groveling in the second book. And there was. The Masked Duet reminded me a lot of the Pack Darling duet by Lola Rock. It's also reverse harem, but the writing was not as good here. It almost felt like it belonged on Wattpad. It had a very juvenile feeling to it, but even though the writing wasn't my favorite, I still loved the story. Like, as much as this feels like a Wattpad story, I would absolutely read this author again, especially if she writes more groveling romances. And then I finally read Meryl Wilsner for the first time. I've had their books on my TBR since like their debut from years ago, but I never read them until now. I read their new book, Cleat Cute, which is a sapphic soccer romance, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself a lot while reading this. I loved the slight rivalry vibes. I loved the steam. It was great. The author is definitely a solid author, and I do need to read the rest of their books now. I have another debut author here. This is N.M. Patel. She wrote Love Shove in New York. It's this interracial romance with a South Asian heroine. She moves to New York for school. It's a new adult college romance, and it was pretty adorable. It's not my favorite read, but still a cute time, so I will put this in C tier. And then Kate Goldbeck is a new to me author. I mean, she's a debut author, but I read her for the Goodreads Choice Awards because her book You Again did get nominated. It is always impressive to see a debut get nominated in the Goodreads Choice Awards. Unfortunately for me, I didn't really like this book. It wasn't bad, but I struggled so hard with these characters. I just really did not get into them, and I honestly believed more in their friendship than their romance. It's this enemies to friends to lovers romance. Both of them are in pretty sucky situations and they share in their misery. So Kate Goldbeck, I could put this in C or D tier. I mean, I did really like the writing, so I will give her that. So C tier. My second to last author is Carrie Winfrey. I read Faking Christmas and it was so much fun. It's got this wild concept of the heroine who pretends to be the owner of her twin sister's farm because that's what her boss thinks, and he invites himself over to the farm for the holidays. She has to pretend to be married to her biggest nemesis while on this farm. It's such a ridiculous time, but it was so good. I found myself laughing a couple times. Also, the Christmas winter vibes were fantastic because there's the whole stuck in a snowstorm trope. It was a really good enemies to lovers fake dating romance, so I will put Carrie Winfrey in B tier. And then the final author that I have is none other than the author who is considered the author of the very first modern day historical romance. This is Kathleen E. Woodiwiss. I finally read her for the first time, even though I own so many of her vintage paperbacks. She has some of the best stepbacks, okay? But yeah, I read her debut for another book club. This is The Flame and the Flower, and it was such a fascinating read. I didn't love it, but I can absolutely appreciate it for what it is, which is the very first historical romance. It is very much a bodice ripper, and even though I didn't love this hero because of the whole bodice ripping, the whole progression of this romance was a very fascinating read. I'm kind of torn between putting her in B or C tier. Like, the story itself, it wasn't bad, but I kind of loved her writing, and I definitely do have plans to read her again. So I think I'll put her in B tier. Okay, I completely forgot to include this one last author. This is Jenna Levine. I read her for the first time this year because she came out with My Roommate is a Vampire, and it was adorable. I can't believe I almost forgot about her because I love this book so much. I know it's got a terrible rating on Goodreads, but honestly, I had the best time with it. It was adorable and fun. It had me laughing. The roommate vampire, and he's a total sweetheart. This was so good, so I have to put her in A tier. So those are all the new authors that I tried this year in 2023. This is a pretty good range of new and different kinds of authors, so I'm kind of proud of myself for that. I'm also glad that I enjoyed like at least a good half of these authors. Let me know what you think of my tier ranking, if we read any of the same new authors this year. Tell me how you would rank them. As always, links to everything will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!